Hi, so today we have with us Snigdha Poonam, who's written Scamlands, Inside the Asian Empire of Fraud That Preys on the World. Hi, Snigdha.
Hello, Manjula. Thanks for having me.
Snigdha, this book really, I think it's Hussein Zaidi who says packed with action and drama and reads like a thriller. It actually does read like a thriller, and at some points, one wonders about these people who just get caught up in all this and who, not just the perpetrators and the traffickers and all that, but also the guys, who go along with it and enjoy it and at the end actually almost become victorious in some sense, though they start as underdogs. You know, so
Yes,
take me through the idea behind this book.
sure. I This book sort of takes off where my last book ended, Dreamers. And with Dreamers, I was trying to understand, this very different kind of generation to ours, to mine, that seemed not so bothered by the circumstances that held them following the dreams, the aspirations that they had of caste and gender. So, I had a bunch of people. Someone wants to go into politics, actually, a woman who wants to get a ticket to fight an election. There's someone who wants to get into Bollywood. There's someone who wants to launch a startup. And I wanted to see what happens. I understand that they're aspirational. I'd already been like, traveling across India, just talking to people, especially young people. So I knew just the scale of their ambitions, and I wanted to see where that leads them. And towards the end of that book, it was very clear that it was already sort of leading them to some very dark territories. And one of those dark territories was this underground, the underworld of scams and fraud. So that's where Dreamers ended. And I ended in this world in of scam centers in Delhi and around. And so, I know what once that ended, I just couldn't really get out of that world because I already had some sources that were in it. I kept seeing that economy, that underworld expanding by thousands and thousands every few months, more and more people joining, more and more kinds of scams starting out, more and more people being scammed and talking about it. And you must have noticed this,
Yes.
when, like talk about 8 to 10 years ago when I started looking into this, we weren't all sort of in it. It wasn't like a common experience that bound us. But today it is. Just before we got in this call, I had a phone call from my own sister at home in India who was telling me she just escaped being scammed by someone who was pretending to be from DTDC and said that she had a parcel, but they missed it, so she has to pay 25 rupees. But actually, if she put in all her, they asked her to put in all her credit card information on the form, and had she put it in, they would have taken everything that is in her bank account.
Yeah.
Most people in my family have had that experience. I'm sure people in your friend circle, in your family circles have.
It's become so common that there are comedy skits about it now. I've seen
Yes,
stand-up comics, hold forth about it. And it's very funny, like when you see it
yes.
in their routine. But it's horrible when it's happening to you.
It is horrible. And the thing is that for all of this, we know very little about who these people are on the other
Hmm.
end of the line. So the other end of the line was my original sort of title for the book. And that was very much sort of the intent behind this book, to go to the other end of the line, because we're always getting calls, getting tests. So there's someone so far away from us that we know what they're doing, but we don't know who they are, why they are doing it, what they get out of it, how they choose us. And so I wanted to use the fraud as a lens to look at um, our society today, in this globalized world. And yeah, so that was so I went I had so yes, I had to go over to the other end of the line. So I how do you tell a story about a world that is not supposed to exist? I could
Hmm.
only tell it by immersing myself in it. So you will see everything. You'll see me trying to find a job in this scam economy. You'll try to see me, going to places where, regions where it's so like the economy is so vast. It has engulfed so many villages, so many towns that You speak to anyone and they have a role to play. So it's like, it's like both the extremes. So yes, that's how the book began.
Now, before we go into the Jamtara thing, I want to start with how with Lamour, right? That site, the dating app, and, and and the character you met, that woman who's got like multiple phones and she's talking to many people, and you try to get that. I mean, obviously as part of your research, you try to get the job, but
Yes.
that chapter I found so insightful because it made me realize. I mean, one just thinks, okay, dating apps, everybody's dating or using these apps and all that, but the fact that so many men in smaller towns have they've never spoken to a woman, they've never dated, and it's in that small window of time before they give in to their families and become married men, that whole
Yeah.
thing. And you brought that out, and how China and India with its surplus men. I mean, this is a great in inverted commas, great business idea,
Yes.
So let's talk about that.
No, I found in most of the chapters, in fact, that whoever had invented these scams knew us sociologically so much better than our actual sociologists and,
Hmm.
political scientists and political economists. And so I wanted to see our world from their point of view. And so yes, I do enter that story. And the other thing that drove that particular story was I'd already been able to show that we have a fraud underworld industry that employs multitudes. I won't be able to say whether it's thousands or tens of thousands or tens of millions of people because it's not a data-driven book. But it employs multitudes. And then if you have such a large number of people who will very readily go over to the ethically gray zone, it's they're they are like an incredible asset, and not just for someone inventing a scam in India for Indians, but anyone anywhere in the world who's trying to target, again, like any demographic. So you could have someone who's looking at India, and they understand exactly the phenomenon that you talked about. So many young men, this like huge tier one difference, like the marriage pressure, the desire to have a romantic or sexual experience. And so they'll vent something for the Indian market. They'll recruit Indians to scam each other, but like the scam lords are sitting somewhere else. And then, again, you see some of the chapters. You have a scam that was invented in India, but someone in Pakistan has been inspired by it, and they take over and run away with it. They mastered it. And so like it also shows you that the story of fraud is the story of globalization, and to my mind, more vice versa. So that was an interesting sort of tension for me to explore.
Yeah, I know. And I was reading and I was thinking these are like memes, people just, regardless of the culture, they pick up that meme and then they run with it, right? And it has a meaning for them, and they're using it. Just like how memes catch on online. These frauds are also like that, right? They're not. I mean, they can be used in different cultures, but
Yeah. Yeah, they could be used in different cultures with like slight bits of adaptation. We already have
yeah,
AI now translating, getting so good at translation. You can impersonate someone over video. You can like hack into people's social media accounts. All of that just makes it just easier and more terrifying for us on the other end.
yeah. But I was thinking, like, when that woman said that they speak to these guys, and then sometimes after they spend all the money on diamonds or whatever gifts and stuff, and then they get into the video chat mode. But even that, I mean, if you with AI, you don't even have to show your face, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that would be the next sort of frontier for these scams. I think we'll start to see that, or we're already seeing that. Yeah, if I sort of
Yeah.
followed up for another few years, this would be a completely new world.
Yeah, it's very fast changing, and also, I was quite fascinated by that. Just I think earlier this week, there was this news about the compound in Myanmar, and people, so many thousands of Indians leaving, and then
Yes.
This book put that into perspective, all these compounds and all these people. So there are lots of these young Indians going abroad and willingly now, right, working in these places. But
Yeah.
top of that, and it was maybe I'm ignorant. I didn't even,
Mm.
realize. One heard about trafficking and stuff, but this is like, it's like quite different, right?
Yeah, it was mind-blowing, heartbreaking, and just like, happening at such a dazzling scale that I just didn't know whether to be, like I said, impressed, mind blown, also trying to get some of these people get out, and also trying to understand whether what they were telling me was the truth. Or there was like, or it was the truth was complicated. And I think it all kind of, all of these were in some form or the other true. So, we go back to what I was talking, which is like you have hundreds of thousands of tens of thousands, however you want to sort of picture them, people who will very rarely take part in a scam to just earn a salary, to move up the ladder, to sometimes like just help their family get through a bad farming season, have a sister married, all sorts of things that push them over, and then they find there's no coming back. And so if of course they can start a scam center in Gurgaon or Thane and get on with their phone calls and apps and Instagram, but um, it is a workforce that has also come to the attention of these, very sophisticated transnational scam cartels,
Hmm.
like proper sort of cybercrime mafias. And they can see that these are people who could be very easily lured into migrating to some of these cities that are being set up in Southeast Asia, where there's very sort of poor regulation. The political class is even more complicit than we have in some sense in India, and so it's
Hmm.
very they have a very easy time setting up like whole scam cities where you
Yeah.
have what they call compounds, and so either you traffic it all initially begins with trafficking. So you give someone a false job offer, and then they get on a flight. once they end up these Once they arrive at these compounds, then that's where the picture begins to become really dark. Their passports are taken away, and then they are shoved into these rooms, like, with bunk beds and four people from South Africa and Uganda and India and Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. So a total like UN style system of human trafficking and exploitation. And yeah, and then so either they go out to their scam floors, each one has like a appointed a floor, or they are beaten or just kept captive in their rooms, denied food, electrocuted, all sorts of things. Sometimes they're just they could lose their life if they refuse to scam. But also, I spent enough time in this particular underworld to understand that, at least like from the South Asian side, some of the circumstances that they were leaving behind was so desperate that they would rather stay. They would rather stay and like do some of or perform some of these operations willingly rather than place a call to Indian embassy or find some kind of an activist group, and there are quite a few now on social media, and ask to be rescued. So you had like a bunch of them who asked to be rescued, who just wanted to get out, even like go back to Malaysia, to China, to Badao and elsewhere in Uttar Pradesh, because they couldn't take it. And then there were people who at first were suffering and then just made peace with it. And then of course there were some who also started to thrive and then got really close to the upper sort of leads of the scam hierarchy, and even like started to be appointed as managers and stuff. So yes, so it was all, I could see this very complicated picture, and then sort of tied back to some of the larger forces that were had led them to this point. So that's why the book begins in India, where you see, the decades and decades of this very oppressive inequality, even like political discrimination, caste inequality. All of that was like had pushed people to a point where they just there's just some of them like just felt they had nothing to lose, or it was like just a matter of survival. And you'll see all of these different forces being explored in different chapters. But like it brings us to this point where we have like this very massive underground job force that anyone in the world can exploit.
And also, like you pointed out, that in places like Jamtara, it's also the caste angle where you feel like you've been put upon and you have been historically oppressed, and this is a way of sort of, it's like payback time in some sense.
Yes.
Like, so let's talk about that. I found that also really interesting. You know.
Yes. I mean, I think the Jamtar, it's one of the oldest sort of scam stories for our modern times in India. But I think it's also something that it's there's just so much to understand there, to unpack there. And I think caste was like just became the lens that I focused on because it's quite obvious from the beginning that there are certain communities that were that had made like a whole sort of stake their lives on it. And I'm talking about whole villages, whole regions, communities where most people were involved in some or the other way, starting from training. So if you were um, someone from an OBC community or someone from a Dalit community or Muslim, you would join someone for training from the same community, and then so it went on and on, then from networks, and then like even with the scams, they would just sort of divide which scam, like if there's a KYC scam, then there's one group that would take charge of that. But then if there's an e-commerce scam, someone, some other village in another community takes charge of that. And yeah.
It's so sad,
And
but it's so comic also.
it is, and they take pride in it, as one of the guys tells me in the book. It's like, you take as much pride in it as I would in doing my work. So in that sense, there is that sense of accomplishment and like even sophistication. But the broader point was that they were doing this in this very tangible backdrop of a caste battle, because the upper castes were feeling felt quite threatened by these by the fact that at least like a section of the marginalized people were able to go up the ladder, to improve their circumstances, to improve their living conditions in some sense, like buy a few things from Amazon, like maybe build another floor to their house, and that had completely wrecked the centuries old systems in these villages. So you also had like a whole class of informers from the upper caste elite who just um, write down their names and pass to the police station. And then you have like a scammer from a Dalit background who understands that, and so then it pushes him further to embrace the caste identity and try to get back. Not to really spoil the chapters for the readers,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
yes, I think it's yeah, I think caste
yeah.
became the lens for understanding the
And when
Jamtara scams.
when you were talking about those magnificent villas that they've built in Jamtara, I wish there were photographs. you know, because I really
Yes.
want to see like those descriptions of those houses with their outrageous kind of designs. There's nothing on it online. I quickly went and looked, but I couldn't find any. I
Oh,
could find
I
other
I
things. You know.
I have a few photos and videos, and I want to put them together at some point now that I have lots of free time. So yeah, I'll try to do that.
And there were also lots of people like who stood out, like that Armugam
Mm,
from that restaurant. How did he say
yeah.
all these things? Wouldn't he get into trouble in
Well,
Sinukwi?
the thing about following these systems that are so vast is that you get to a point where nobody thinks it's something that anyone can touch from the outside. And it was true in so many of these scenarios, whether it's Jamtara or Assam or Cambodia. At some point, they just feel like this is the only world that they now live in. So yes, a few people get arrested, they go to jail, they come back, and they get back to the same scams, or they invent new scams. The similar system was playing out in Cambodia. You have Sihanoukville, a whole city that's designed facilitate these cyber scams targeting, the whole world. And so you will have like a cycle of outrage, and then you have like people in the scam centers asking to be rescued. You have activists sort of outing these centers, and then there'll be a police crackdown. There'll be Interpol and American authorities and British authorities putting these scam lords to sanction, and then everything goes underground, and then a few months later it's all like back again. Maybe the same people haven't returned to these centers, but as we figured out by that point in the book, there are thousands and thousands who will take their place. So at some point it just gets to a stage where nobody really cares what I know or what they're telling me, because what can I do? What can yeah, I think that's something that I found interesting and obviously very useful for my work. That
Mhm.
people could talk in, and I did change some of their names because even if they don't realize it, they could get into trouble. So
Because
yeah.
I was thinking that Namaste India manager who's warned so many people and who spoke to you at length, he could get into trouble, right?
Yes, so that's why I think, yeah, Namaste India is not the name of his restaurant, because
Thank
that
God.
that
I
that
hope it's not the only Indian restaurant there. I started getting really worried for that man.
Yes, I did too. I did too. And not just there, in a couple of these scenarios while I was reporting, I used to get worried that people didn't care, that they were telling me these things, they could tell someone else these things. And yeah, and but the truth is that most of the stories have actual sort of cases, police cases, court cases, going on. So they realize, I think the point I'm trying to make is they understand that they could go to jail because they have been to jail, and yet they will come out and they'll get back to the same scams, or the same life. That's the scary part.
Yeah. There doesn't seem to be any end to this. It's like that demon whose head you cut off and, before it drops down to the ground, it comes back up again.
Yes.
It's like that.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
I don't see it ending, you know.
No, because you get to a point where people are asking to be rescued from a scam center so they can join another one. Because otherwise, if they had, because if they try to get out on them by themselves, they would have to pay the cost, at which they were trafficked. So it just
Yeah.
becomes an easier way for them to get out, which is a very
It's a very
yeah, I
jugaad
think
thing.
it is a very Jugadu thing, and it blew my mind away because I did help someone to escape, and then by putting him in touch with the Indian authorities. And then a few months later, I meet someone from the same compound who had escaped the same compound, and she tells me, this guy, he used to be like, he used to be like coming out with this big sort of um wads of cash and waving it around, and he was like so happy. Now I don't know if that is true or not, but the thing is that it was an extremely morally complicated situation to try to dive in.
Yeah. I'm wondering, like, at first, maybe these guys had qualms. I don't know. You
Yeah, they
think?
did. They did. They did.
And
Because
then
it
they
would
just
be,
overcame.
otherwise they would have been acting really well. Because I had really long, I used to have really long conversations with them all the time. Like they had my number and they would call me anytime. And some of the stories that they did tell me initially when they start out are painful, to even hear. When you realize that this is your life and you can't escape it, it is, yeah, it's hard. And then, but we are human beings. We adjust to anything. And the money is like the amounts you can earn are so vast. It totally changes your priorities, your sense of proportion.
Mm. And I'd imagine, I think you mentioned it also. For them, it's like some old person living in the West and you're scamming them of their pension funds. Makes no difference to you, you know?
Yes, yes, yes. I was doing an interview with someone in America, and they were really interested in this question, which is why not? Why don't they feel any guilt for victims in the West? And I was saying, for someone sitting in Delhi or Calcutta or Phnom Penh, they can't physically, culturally relate to their victims in Texas and Manchester and Melbourne and beyond. A lot of them carry a actual sense of grievance against Western societies. Because, like, if you just think about the level of inequality, it's massive. Like, I can't say that I don't feel it. So how can I blame them for not feeling it? And besides, they'll talk about colonialism, they'll talk about even modern systems of exploitation, trafficking, exploiting labor, capital, resources from low-income countries. And so if that is something that they can use to shrug off moral responsibility, they just latch onto it.
Wow. People will, yeah, but I mean, it's still sad. I guess
It
it's
is
sad on both
sad.
sides.
It is sad,
Yeah.
especially when you have also like people from the Gen Z, people who probably don't know that Americans didn't colonize us.
Mm.
But it's also sort of mixing up history and then
Yeah.
sort of
Everybody
using that
who's,
as
yeah,
yes,
who's
yeah,
Western and maybe white is
yes,
this.
yes, is a
What?
bad person.
Yeah, that's terrible.
It
Yeah.
is.
So
It
tell
is.
me, how did you like work out? How did you work on this? You've gone to so many places and you've like, had these extensive interviews. But how did you chalk it out? Or did it just grow organically, each from each? Uh, you know.
Not each from each. I think it's the other the thing you were talking about earlier, which is just yeah, lots of desk research, talking to people all over the place, looking at leads everywhere. Everywhere from lots from social media, of course, but also actual sources in some of these places in India. I was working as a reporter for Hindustan Times, as you will remember, so that helped me with the actual sort of access to like a really wide range of developments in across India. But also I used to, not so much, but I used to be like an extremely online person. So I was like just downloading every app, even like dating apps that I didn't need to be on. But if someone said there's that Tinder is no longer like the most downloaded app, but a Chinese app, I would just download it to see what's going on. And once I go into the app, I realize this doesn't make sense because these I'm why am I as a woman not being shown men on
Yeah.
the app, but I'm being told to be a paid user. Why am I being paid? So that sort of curiosity would then what am I being paid for? And then I realize, oh, I'm going to be paid to like lure these unsuspecting tier two men who just wants to have a video call with me.
Yeah.
And so and that's how it'll go. Like, I go on a like a shopping website and I realized it's actually there's a link to a betting website. And the only way that you can enter the betting website by knowing a code, and to know the code, you need to approach someone on the internet. And so I just, yeah, that's what my life was. And yeah, in some sense, I think I'm glad I'm done with that because I can be in my own life, not doing this 24/7. But yes, lots of like rabbit holes, both online and from actual sources.
I would imagine in the case of that dating app, it would be like women just shrugging it off as almost like a prank. But it's also there, I would think
Yeah,
there's also some satisfaction of getting back at men. I
yeah, yeah. You, yeah,
felt that even as I was reading it.
But that is a correct, totally correct reading because you have a woman who's just saying, we get harassed like almost every day.
Yeah,
Just getting to our jobs in Delhi and Gurgaon. So it's not like if you meet someone who's a little aggressive or he will say something dirty, it's not something that you've not faced before. So why not just then exploit it to your advantage? And then
yeah.
at some point she just says, I ask her, who were you on the call with? And she said, Bakra tha. So you can see that it's some poor chap in Saharanpur, but in another context, maybe someone like that is she's felt threatened by someone like that walking on a street or something. So anyway, it was a really loaded dynamic.
So, yeah, so the guy, and this, and also I'm thinking it's almost like, how, I don't know whether everybody did it, but in college, when one was in college and they're on public transport, you're waiting for some guy to act smart. At least in Bombay, it was a lot of us did it. Act smart so that you could turn around and like beat him up. So it was almost like that, you know, and make a public spectacle of it so that he's really, ashamed. And a lot of people take a lot of, get a lot of satisfaction out of that. So there's that aspect.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Yes, I remember I'd once written a story where like these women would attend karate classes just so that if someone even approached them on the bus, they would just
yeah.
karate the hell out of this guy. And I wrote this for a Western publication. They said, but what about this thing extrajudicial, or what about this thing? And I was like, you don't you don't understand India. No one's going to arrest her for this.
Yeah, they not be very sympathetic.
Yes.
Anyway. So, what was supposed to, like when you were in Sihanoukville, right?
Yeah.
What was it? It was kind of dangerous, wasn't it? So
Yes.
how did you? Yeah, because like when that woman tells you, Nicole, I think,
Yeah.
who's from the organization,
Yeah.
who's kind of
An
helping, you,
activist. Yeah.
yeah,
She's an
activist,
activist against these scams.
who's also scammed herself, right?
Yes.
So she told you that it was dangerous. So did you? How did you negotiate that place?
With a lot of fear.
Yeah, I'm
I
sure.
yeah, I knew that I could get into trouble at some point, and nobody wants to be kidnapped
Yeah,
and then be put in a cell and their phones taken away, especially in a foreign country. So I guess I just like took every precaution that I could. Yeah, so I think I worked quite closely with the activists in Southeast Asia, and they would tell me this is the taxi driver that you should go with. And just like, yeah, stay with him and stay on the call. And then also just, even if I were kidnapped, because these are not your insurance scammers in Assam, or your KYC scammers in Jatar. These are very dangerous cybercrime cartels in Southeast Asia. And if you were to be kidnapped, at least like just make sure that you have an extra phone. So they'll take one phone, but you will have an extra phone, and then to just contact someone, to drop a message somewhere. And I would just like I memorized some of these numbers, Facebook pages, etc., where I would just. It was scary.
yeah,
It
it is
was.
very scary.
Yes.
Even that girl that you met who was taken across the river, I don't know, she must have been really
Oh man.
frightened.
Yes. Yeah. The human trafficking part of this is grisly, and the truth is, it's continuing. It's continuing at a very large scale. You have very young, very, very young Indians, like people who are not yet 20 years old, and they get these incredible looking job offers in Thailand, and you don't even need a visa to go to Thailand. So they like just keep showing up um, in at the Thailand airport, and every day you will have dozens of like Indians showing up, clutching these job letters, and then from there they are taken in these totally darkened vans and then taken to the borders of Thailand and Myanmar. And then by then they realize, because the driver won't say anything to them. They are asking where are we going, and he won't answer. He'll just like stop at a McDonald's, allow them some time to eat and maybe in the car, and that's it. And they reach the border, and maybe sometimes they spend a night at the hotel, again with no communication. But they're seeing that everyone else is either a South Asian or some young unemployed person from another low income country. And like come morning, they're all, again, wordlessly just led towards the boat and put in it. They don't know where they are going. Is it still Thailand? Is it they've reached another country? They can't understand the language. Their phones have stopped working. In this particular story, at least her phone pinged when she crossed the river to say that they'd landed in Myanmar, so she knew. But a lot of people don't even know where in the world they are and whether they'll come back alive. So they're not even at this point, they're not even thinking of scams and scam centers and what they'll have to do. It's like I said, it's terrifying, it's heartbreaking.
Hmm.
And then, but the thing is, then they go on to do these, these scams that are emotionally, financially devastating for the victims, because I complete the whole journey. I go over to the United States. I meet some of those victims, and their stories are heartbreaking. They
Yeah,
are they will never have their lives back. They've lost their entire savings. Some of them are immigrants who've spent their whole lives, like, saving every dollar that they could to send their kids to school to have a nice retirement. Because we're talking America, there's no like state pension, and so they
Yeah.
lose everything. They lose their homes. They have to come live with their children. So yeah, I think it was like a, sadness at both ends.
Yeah, it's really terrible, and it's kind of very eye-opening because you think of, I mean, when you think of scams, you actually don't think of the scamsters very favorably at all. I mean, I'm not saying
Mm.
that now I think of them favorably, but now, I never even thought that this level of human trafficking could be pushing the scamsters. I just thought
Yeah.
that they're bad people or something. I mean, that's the simplistic thing. Okay, somebody who's robbing some poor old woman in Texas who's like in her 80s. I
Yeah.
just think that okay, whoever's doing this is evil. But the fact that they themselves are victims and they're holed up in this scam city and they can't get out of the compound, they'd be beaten and
They can't get out, and they're jumping from these compounds, and they're some of them are dying from that, and so it was like a humanitarian disaster.
yeah.
And for when I would speak to investigators in America, they were like they couldn't touch these guys. They couldn't touch the masterminds in this sort of Chinese underworld. And they
How come they can't get to them? They seem to get to other people, but how come they can't get to these Chinese scamsters? The
Because
kiddies.
when you're investigating a scam, you need to show, and it remains true from like Jamtara to Sinokville. You need to show that someone, the money trail that they profited from it. The money came to their account, and with these pig butchering scams from Southeast Asia, it happens on crypto chains, and so
Mm.
sometimes you are able to identify, using some methods where exactly on the chain the money vanished into an actual account. But most of the times that will have like, they use so many sort of obscure ways to move around the money that you'll never get to the actual person behind it. But they are, I think, just like with just last week, the British authorities have arrested an actual Chinese origin cyber crime boss in Southeast Asia. So
Wow. So exactly like how I mean, whatever cultural elements have pushed in South Asians to be part of this or to be drawn into this or to be trafficked into this. What is it that makes this industry be ruled by the Chinese? I mean, what is it? And one doesn't want to to stereotype people, but there must be something, right? Like inequality is driving this in India. What is it that's driving it in China?
a number of things, they've had a very early advantage with technology. So,
Hmm.
like by the time that we were using sort of e-commerce app or even like a TikTok, they already had moved on to
Hmm.
the more advanced apps, or they were using cryptocurrency. They were using dating apps. You already, like as I mentioned in the chapter on the dating scams, by the time that these scams even arrive in India, you already have like a whole trail of victims through China who years before had
Yeah.
already sort of explored these
Even
apps, explored.
2015, right? You mentioned
Yes,
by 2015 they already knew of the existence of this butchering.
yes, pig butchering, and like so,
Yeah.
yeah, with the dating scams, a lot of these technology-based scams. So there is that the technological frontier that China absolutely has the advantage of, but also really vast infrastructure,
Mm.
sophisticated. Like again, like you have such a large population
Yeah.
of like young people who are frustrated by the actual job market. It's more true today than maybe it was 20 years ago. And
Yeah.
so, it's a really large underground economy. And when the Chinese state tries to push them out, they, migrate to Southeast Asia. They all sort of get Cambodian passports or Thai passports, and they move the entire infrastructure, blink of an eye, to cities in Myanmar, Thailand, the Philippines. Now they're setting up in Dubai because because of course their roots to the mainland are very strong. They have like sources of capital that like someone if someone in India was trying to do that, I think we will run against the actual truth of our actual economy, not because everything kind of loops back into each other. So so we can't. I'm just saying we can't compete with the Chinese at the level of like resources, technology, capital. They are way ahead of us,
Clearly, even in scamming.
even in yes.
Hmm. And all these, these people that you met, what struck what struck you about them?
But each of them is different. Um, try to make that point in the introduction that when I started on this book, I thought it'll be like a book about scammers. On the other end of the line, I'll see who are these people, why are they doing it, and everyone has a different motivation, a different story, completely different journey. A lot of the patterns are the same.
But
And
I'm interested in the ones who don't fall into the pattern, the ones who decide that, boss, this is not correct. I'm leaving. I have to get out. And who succeed in getting out. Is there something about those guys? Because like this girl you met in Delhi, and the
mm,
other boy who worked in Dubai and then
yeah,
later was trafficked into this place. There's something about them that makes them not be uh, happy with that.
yes, yes. It's a very fine distinction, even in those two stories, and that's what I'm saying. Everyone's story is different. For the young woman who escaped the scam compound in Myanmar, she did not want to embrace a life of scamming, and perhaps she didn't come from a truly desperate circumstance, or
Hmm.
maybe she has a higher sort of moral threshold. I don't know, but certainly she did not want to be a part of this at all. Whereas for the guy who from Mysore who ended up
Hmm.
in Cambodia, he's already told by Arumugam that you are going to end up in a scam center, and he tells me right that he still goes. He says I should have
Hmm.
listened to him, but I still go. It's only like the level of torture,
Oh.
the starvation of he. It's at some point he says I just could not eat that Chinese cabbage every day,
Oh,
and that was
yeah.
it humanized him for me, and for each of these people there was like there was something like that. He just couldn't make his peace with the food. Um, there's some people who ended up in Southeast Asia eating Chinese food and they just couldn't make sure that it was halal. Uh,
Yeah.
in some cases the physical torture was just so extreme. So it's not so some of them have like a concern for the victims. Some of them just have a concern for their own safety. So yes, some of them just yeah, like I said, some of them get really homesick
Yeah.
and want to go back. And I think that sort of also leads us to where then this goes, and maybe at some point all of this whole infrastructure dismantles, and you have all of these people are released. Some of them will then go back, maybe turn back on this life, but some of them might want to just return to Delhi and Calcutta and start their own centers because
Yeah.
you can be in your country, eat the food that you like, and still earn the money that you've got used to earning. So I think
Yeah.
yeah, this the story carries on.
They could view this as apprenticeship.
Yes. Yes, because towards the end of that chapter, you see that some of these scam compounds have started employing South Asian chefs or ordering from South
Yes.
Asian restaurants because they realize that if people can't eat what they what what they like, what is their food, they're not gonna get up at 2 a.m. and start texting some woman in Manhattan for 8 hours on a stretch. That you need to feed them
Yeah.
their
God.
food.
Yeah. These are the comic aspects to this really
Yeah.
grim sort of
Yes.
tale, you know. Gosh. Anyway,
Yeah.
are you working on something next, or are you taking a break? Because
I'm
this
taking a
seems
break.
like a really emotional sort of journey, doing this book.
Yes.
It's not like any. It
Yes.
could have screwed with your own mind also, I feel.
Yes. Yes, it did. It took me a while to come out. So I finished writing about a year ago. So I think since a year, since then I've had a normal life, and it's been great.
Yeah. But are you in touch with some of these people still, or what?
I've tried not to. I've tried very hard to just move on in some sense. I still sort of keep up through the news, like, when the KK Park in Myanmar was raided and these people got
Hmm.
out. I could have got in touch with some people, but I just chose not to. I because, like I said in the beginning, this book didn't start with Scamlands. It started with Dreamers. So I now have spent about 10 years in this underworld, and I think I need to I need to write about something else. I need to, or not write about anything at all, but really just leave this behind.
Okay. Gosh.
Yeah.
Leaving it behind sounds, and I love those, loved is not the right word, those instruction manuals.
Yes. Yes.
The
Those were the
end,
highlight.
yeah, it's both
Yeah.
comic relief and not at all funny. No?
Not at all. That's every time I had to read that chapter, I would just get engrossed in these day-to-day scripts for the actual conversations, because some of them are so good
Yeah,
in how they build the relationship. And at some point, one of these scammers is saying to their victim in America, you must start your day with a glass of hot water, because you've just woken up and your blood is thickened by the 8 hours of sleep, and so you need to. And I'm just thinking, who are the people writing this script?
yeah,
How
who
do
are the
they?
people writing these scripts? I mean, they must be like really, I don't know, they seem very, very acute.
Yeah, they were hiring. So I did figure out they were hiring sociologists and semanticists and working on these. Yeah, so it wasn't AI. Maybe it will be at some point, because now you'll have AI will have been fed all these scripts, but they were written by actual human beings. Some of yeah, from like academic experts in
Yeah,
human manipulation. Yeah.
yeah. So imagine those people and what's making them do it. I was wondering about that also.
Yeah. Yes, what's making them do it, what's like towards the end, and I don't go into this aspect, but they started to hire fashion models to be on these compounds, because people had started to ask that for video chats, to be connected to the people that they were texting with. So they needed to have attractive women on these compounds. And so this is where it was already going when I ended the book. Actual sort of women. So they're not scammers, but not in the sense that um, they're chatting with the victims, but they will be just on hand to get on a call to show their faces.
Gosh. So that's like you mentioned in the book, those are probably women from what? Eastern Europe. And
Yes, yes, Western countries, white women.
so this is a whole, I mean, it's like right across the globe, right? And
Yes,
it's surreal. No?
it is. It is.
Gosh.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
didn't I didn't think it would be, but toward the end, that's why then I went back and looked at everything that I had, and I thought that's the story. The story of fraud is the story of globalization. It's not an Indian
Yeah.
phenomenon.
And vice versa, you say also.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So great. So for the listeners, go out and get Scamlands Inside the Asian Empire Fraud That Preys on the World by Snigdha Poonam. It's absolutely riveting. I mean, it really is like a thriller, and it's also very insightful. I mean, there's so many places where I have marked out, bits about our own societies and also about human nature. So I found that very rewarding, also.
Yeah.
So
Thank you. Thank you.
thanks so
It
much for talking
makes
to
it all
me.
worthwhile. Yeah.
So thank you for talking to me.
Thank you.